Now, I have a few more what ifs of my own. So, I like to. I watch a lot of old NBA stuff. So, a lot of these guys maybe you don't know, but so in the 1950s, there was actually this guy called Maurice Stokes. So he was actually pretty interesting because he was, if you look at his stats back then, it was like 17, 17, and 4 or 5 or something, like something pretty nuts. So he's actually technically the third highest rebounder of all time if you're talking about rebounder per average, rebounder per game. But he only played like 3 seasons. And then this is probably the most tragic what if because, okay, well, Petrovic obviously died in his prime, very tragic, right? But this is also probably equally as tragic because he got paralyzed in an NBA game. There's like the last game of the season before the 1958 playoffs. He got paralyzed and he was never able to play again, right? So it's pretty interesting. Play for the Cincinnati Royals. So it's a what if that people don't think about because it happened so long ago. But that team would have drafted Oscar Robertson, Jerry Lucas, had Jack Twyman on it. That's another 3 Hall of Famers, right? So that's another interesting what if just because the guy, not the best shooter, but his defense, his rebounding, and his passing for a big guy. He's power forward. So yeah, it'd be kind of interesting to see, what would have become of that. And then some of the others, the ABA stuff would be pretty interesting. Like, what if Rick Barry never went to the ABA, played with Nate Thurmond, and, that he would have contended with the Lakers. Yeah, Lakers for the championship probably. The Bucks actually played in the West at that time, so they would have contended with the Bucks too. So that would have been interesting. A few other guys actually jumped to the ABA before they never actually played in the NBA was Mel Daniels and Roger Brown. Roger Brown actually because he was blackballed from the NBA for a so-called point shaving scandal, which he never actually was. He was never guilty of it. But anyways, NBA blackballed everyone at that time remotely associated with any scandals. So he couldn't play in the NBA. Turned out to be a pretty good player for the Pacers, right? So something like if you watch the 1970 ABA Finals, the guy averaged like 30, 32 points a game. So pretty incredible player in his prime because if people saw Roger Brown play, he's more of like a playground player. You can think of him as a Connie Hawkins, Dr. J type of player. So, Earl Monroe, right? That kind of like playground player, right? So it would have been pretty interesting to see Roger Brown play in the NBA. He never did. Some people call him the best player never to have played in the NBA. But Mel Daniels, again, this is a pretty interesting what if, but he would have gone to the Cincinnati Royals. So the Cincinnati Royals team of the 1960s was actually pretty stacked, right? So you got Oscar Robertson, Jerry Lucas, Jack Twyman, Wayne Embry. So there's at least 4 Hall of Famers on that team. Most people don't realize this because the Royals don't exist anymore. Now they're the Sacramento Kings. But back in the 60s, right, most teams were actually stacked because there weren't that many teams in the league. There's only 8 teams. But when you have 8 teams, you have still like a pretty sizable talent pool. Then you're going to have more, each team is going to have a lot of talented players on it, right? So people think that less teams means it's less competitive, but it's actually the opposite, right? Less teams is actually more competitive given the same or similar sized talent pool, right? So only 8 teams, but you have a lot of talented guys to go around to each team. So that's why in the 60s, there's actually at least like 3 Hall of Famers on every team, right? Just weren't that many teams, but you had a lot of talented players. So it was actually fairly competitive that back then from like a stacked team standpoint, right? So a lot of people get the wrong idea and think it's less competitive, but it's actually more competitive. Anyways, the Cincinnati Royals team from the 60s, 4 Hall of Famers already on it. When you add Mel Daniels, who was drafted by the Cincinnati Royals, right? Like, so let's say he didn't go to the ABA and he got drafted by the Cincinnati Royals. That would have been a completely stacked team then, right? You have basically 5 Hall of Famers on one team, right? So in that case, like they could have beat the Boston Celtics maybe, like who knows, right? And then Bill Russell probably wouldn't be rated as high and Oscar Robertson would be rated a lot higher, right? But, that's just another what if, right? You have 4 Hall of Famers, you add another Hall of Famer, Mel Daniels. If he didn't go to the ABA, he would have got drafted by the Royals instead. Then you have the all-time leading ABA rebounder on that team as well, who won 2 MVPs in that league. Obviously, he would have been pretty good in the NBA as well, right? Maybe not as good as he was in the ABA, but he still would have been pretty good. So there's 2 what ifs with the Royals there. And other ABA what ifs, Artis Gilmore, if he actually went to the Bulls instead of going to the ABA, that would have been interesting because people don't realize, but the 1970s Bulls was actually pretty good. They just never made the finals, right? But they had multiple All-Stars on that team. You got Jerry Sloan, a really scrappy player. Bob Love, right? Pretty good scoring defender. You got Norm Van Leer, another really good defender. Pretty good point guard. And you add Artis Gilmore onto that team, like, man. And then you have Artis Gilmore's also a good defender too. So that would have been a pretty good defensive team, right? Love at the power forward, Gilmore at the center position, and Van Leer, the point guard. All those guys good defenders. Jerry Sloan also pretty good defender as well at the SG position. So man, that would have been a pretty interesting team. Probably would have made the finals actually. And then you got the big one, right? Just Dr. J, right? If Dr. J didn't go to the ABA, he would have actually. Well, this is interesting because Dr. J was originally actually drafted by the Milwaukee Bucks in the NBA, right? So that's where his draft rights were. So he would have gone to Kareem and Oscar's Bucks, right? Because he was drafted in 71, I think. So yeah, he would have gone to the championship Bucks with Kareem and Oscar. So, and Bob Dandridge as well. So that would have been a stacked team. But actually, Dr. J he actually played with the Hawks a little bit. So this was kind of he was already signed a contract with the Hawks, even though his draft rights was with the Bucks. So he played with Pete Maravich in training camp as well. So that would have been also interesting because the Hawks had Pete Maravich, they had Lou Hudson, which was a pretty good scorer, and they had Walt Bellamy at the time. So that would have been interesting what if too. Unfortunately, the court said that basically you had like Dr. J had to play for the Virginia Squires, right? Because he signed with them first, or the ABA got him first. Even though the Bucks had his draft rights, and he also technically signed a contract with the Hawks, but the court assigned his. Ultimately decided to rule in favor of the ABA, which is why he went there. But man, that would have changed a lot of things, right? Imagine him going to the Bucks or the Bucks or the Hawks. Either of those would have been pretty good contenders once you add a prime Dr. J, right, onto that team. Another guy, Connie Hawkins, pretty interesting. I don't know how much you know about him, but Connie Hawkins blackballed from the NBA as well. He actually played in the NBA because he had to, right, until there was a lawsuit, and then he finally got to play in the NBA again. But by then, he was already like a little bit, he was 27, but it's like a little bit past his prime because the injury started to pile up. One thing I did notice about Connie Hawkins is that once he started playing the NBA, like his first 2 seasons in the Phoenix Suns were really, really pretty good, actually. Like he averaged something like 25, 10, and 4 or 5 in the NBA in his rookie season. So that actually might be one of the best rookie seasons ever. People never talk about that. But yeah, Connie Hawkins, like if you talk to anyone back then who played against him, and he was definitely like on the level of Dr. J, basically. He was like the pre-Dr. J, Dr. J. So yeah, that's and also pretty kind of like a Baylor type of player as well. So that's interesting. What if? And he kind of injured early, right? It's interesting because Connie Hawkins actually ended his career with the Lakers. People don't know that.